The blood-red sun sank below the horizon as Rosalie Sinclair clutched her infant son to her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she stumbled toward the lone cabin on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona territory. It was 1878, and she had nowhere else to turn, no one else to trust but the man she'd once loved, the man who didn't know he was a father. The journey from town had taken longer than expected, each step a battle against exhaustion and fear. Behind her, the distant sound of horses made her heart race. They were coming, her husband's men, and they wouldn't stop until they found her and the baby. The cabin stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, a thin trail of smoke rising from the chimney. Isaiah Barrett was home. Rosalie hadn't seen him in over a year, not since that passionate night before he'd left for the cattle drive north, not knowing she was betrothed to another, a marriage arranged by her father to settle debts. She reached the weathered porch, her legs nearly giving way beneath her. With one arm holding her 2-month-old son, she pounded desperately on the door. "Isaiah," she cried, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "Isaiah, please." The door swung open, revealing a tall man with broad shoulders, his dark hair longer than she remembered, his face more weathered. His blue eyes widened in shock. "Rosalie." "They're coming," she gasped, pushing past him into the cabin. "My husband's men, they'll kill us both." Isaiah's expression hardened as he peered past her into the gathering darkness. "What have you gotten yourself into, Rose?" "This is your son," she said, pulling back the blanket to reveal the infant's face. The baby had Isaiah's eyes unmistakably. "Victor doesn't know. He thinks Thomas is his, but he's not. He's yours, Isaiah, and when he finds out—" She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking. Outside, the sound of approaching horses grew louder. "Take my baby and run," she begged, trying to press the child into his arms. "Please, they'll never stop looking for me, but they might not know about you." Isaiah's jaw clenched as he looked down at the child, his son, then back at the woman he'd never stopped loving. His hands closed gently around the baby, cradling him with surprising tenderness for a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. "Not without you too," he said firmly, his voice low and resolute. "I won't leave you behind, Rose. Not again." He moved quickly, retrieving his rifle from beside the fireplace. "There's a trapdoor under the bed. My father built it years ago when Apache raids were common. Get down there with Thomas. I'll handle Victor's men." "They'll kill you," she protested. "They can try." His eyes softened as he looked at her. "Go, Rose. I'll come for you when it's safe." Rosalie hesitated only a moment before taking the baby and crawling under the bed, finding the hidden door in the floorboards. As she descended into the small earthen cellar with her son, she heard Isaiah moving furniture, concealing their hiding place. Above her, the cabin door crashed open. Through gaps in the floorboards, she saw boots, 3 pairs, and heard the muffled sound of angry voices. "Where is she, Barrett?" "Don't know what you're talking about," Isaiah replied calmly. "Haven't seen Rosalie Sinclair in over a year." "It's Rosalie Davenport now," the voice snarled. "Victor Davenport's wife, and she's stolen something that belongs to him." "I live alone," Isaiah said. "Feel free to look around, but then get off my property." Rosalie held her breath as heavy footsteps moved across the floor above. The baby stirred, and she pressed him tighter to her breast, praying he wouldn't cry. One boot stepped directly over the trapdoor, and she bit her lip until she tasted blood. "There's nobody here," one of the men finally said. "She was headed this way," another insisted. "Tracks led right to this cabin." "Maybe she kept going," the first voice suggested. "North toward Prescott." There was a long pause. "We'll check the barn and outbuildings. If we don't find anything, we'll head north at first light." The door closed and the cabin fell silent. Seconds stretched into minutes. Rosalie counted her heartbeats, waiting until the trapdoor above her creaked open, revealing Isaiah's face. "They're checking the property," he whispered, "but they'll be moving on soon. I told them I saw a woman matching your description heading toward Prescott yesterday." "Thank you," she breathed, passing the baby up to him before climbing out herself. Isaiah looked down at the infant in his arms, a mix of wonder and uncertainty on his face. "He has my mother's chin," he said softly. "And your eyes," Rosalie added, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "I named him Thomas after my grandfather." Isaiah nodded, still staring at the child. "Thomas Barrett," he tested the name. "It suits him." "Thomas Sinclair," she corrected gently. "On the birth certificate, Victor. He wouldn't allow me to use my family name." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "Tell me everything, Rose. What kind of trouble are you in?" She sank into a chair by the fire, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. "Victor Davenport owns half of Tucson now. When my father lost our ranch gambling, Victor offered to clear the debt if I married him." Her voice grew bitter. "I had no choice. Father would have gone to prison otherwise." "That was after I left," Isaiah said, piecing it together. "After that night we spent together." Rosalie nodded. "I discovered I was with child a month after the wedding. I prayed the baby would favor me enough that Victor wouldn't question it, but—" She gestured to Thomas, whose features clearly resembled Isaiah's. "He suspects. He knows." "The timing was wrong, and when Thomas was born with your eyes, your jawline, Victor flew into a rage. He threatened to—" She couldn't finish, her voice breaking. "I took Thomas and ran the first chance I got. And now he's sent men to bring you back." "To bring Thomas back," she corrected. "Me, he'll probably kill. Or worse." Isaiah passed the baby back to her and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. "They're still searching the barn. We don't have much time." He moved with purpose then, gathering supplies. Ammunition for his revolver and rifle, dried food, water. "There's a place we can go. A cabin in the Catalina Mountains. It was a line shack for the old Barrett ranch before my father lost most of our land. Victor's men won't find us there." "We're leaving tonight?" Rosalie asked, rising from her chair. "As soon as those men are gone," Isaiah confirmed. "We'll head east, then double back north. With luck, they'll follow the false trail to Prescott for days before realizing they've been fooled." Rosalie watched him move around the cabin, efficient and decisive. This wasn't the same young cowboy she'd fallen in love with. That Isaiah had been full of dreams and laughter. This man was harder, more cautious, his movements those of someone accustomed to danger. "What happened to you, Isaiah?" she asked softly. "After you left," his hand stilled briefly. "Life," he answered before continuing to pack. "Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the army, spent time with the Ute up in Colorado Territory." He didn't elaborate further. "I wrote to you," she admitted. "When I found out I was carrying your child, the letters came back unopened." Isaiah's expression softened slightly. "I was moving around a lot. Didn't settle back here until 6 months ago, after my father passed." The sound of horses outside brought their conversation to an abrupt halt. Isaiah moved to the window again. "They're leaving," he said, watching as the 3 riders headed north out of his property. "We'll give them an hour to make sure they're gone, then we move." That hour passed in tense silence. Isaiah checked and rechecked his weapons while Rosalie nursed Thomas and changed his swaddling clothes. When the baby fell asleep, she placed him gently in a basket Isaiah had lined with a blanket. "We'll need to travel light," Isaiah said. "I've got 2 horses. You and Thomas will ride Juniper, she's steadier. I'll be on Diablo." "How far is this cabin?" "About 15 miles into the mountains. Rough country. We should make it by dawn if we're careful." Rosalie nodded, trying to hide her exhaustion. "I can make it." Isaiah studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped slightly. "When did you last sleep, Rose?" "I don't remember," she admitted. "I've been running for 3 days." He crossed to her then, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this," he promised. "I won't let anything happen to you or Thomas." The sincerity in his voice brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Why are you helping us? I married another man, Isaiah. I betrayed what we had." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "You did what you had to for your family. I understand that better than most." He glanced at the sleeping baby. "Besides, that's my son. That makes you my family now, whether you wear another man's ring or not." The hour passed, and Isaiah deemed it safe to leave. They slipped out the back of the cabin, leading the horses until they were well away from the property before mounting. Rosalie held Thomas securely against her chest, wrapped in multiple blankets against the cool desert night. They rode in silence, Isaiah leading them on a circuitous route through washes and along rocky terrain where their tracks would be difficult to follow. The moon rose, casting the desert in silver light, illuminating saguaro cacti that stood like sentinels against the star-filled sky. Rosalie found herself studying Isaiah's profile as he rode beside her. The boy she'd loved had become a man more serious, more dangerous, but with the same inherent kindness that had first drawn her to him. He'd taken them in without hesitation, risked his life for a child he'd only just learned existed. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her gaze. "That I never stopped loving you," she answered honestly, too exhausted for pretense. "Even when I stood before the minister with Victor, it was your face I saw." Isaiah was silent for a long moment. "I came back for you," he finally said. 8 months after I left, I had enough money saved to ask for your hand properly." His voice grew tight. "They told me you were married to Victor Davenport, that you'd moved into his mansion in town." "I didn't want to," she whispered. "I know that now." They fell silent again as the trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file. The terrain grew steeper, the desert giving way to scrub oak and pine as they climbed into the mountains. Thomas slept soundly against Rosalie's chest, occasionally making small noises that made her heart clench with love and fear. It was an hour before dawn when they reached the cabin, a small, sturdy structure nestled in a grove of ponderosa pines. A small creek burbled nearby, and the air was cooler at this elevation, fragrant with pine sap. "It's not much," Isaiah said as he helped Rosalie down from her horse, careful of the baby. "But it's solid. My father and I rebuilt it 3 years ago." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, one room with a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. "You'll take the bed," Isaiah said, lighting a lantern. "I'll sleep by the fire." Rosalie didn't argue. She was swaying on her feet with exhaustion. She placed Thomas in the center of the bed, surrounding him with blankets to keep him from rolling, then collapsed beside him, asleep almost instantly. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window. Thomas was no longer beside her. For a moment, panic seized her until she spotted Isaiah sitting in a chair by the fire, holding the baby in his arms, talking to him in a soft voice. "Your mama is the bravest woman I've ever known," he was saying. "And the prettiest too. You're a lucky boy to have her eyes." "He has your eyes," Rosalie said, sitting up. "Not mine." Isaiah looked up, a smile touching his lips. "You slept the day away. It's nearly sunset again. You should have woken me. You needed the rest." He rose, bringing Thomas to her. "He's been fed and changed. There was goat's milk in the pantry." Rosalie took her son, checking him over automatically before looking back at Isaiah in surprise. "You know how to care for an infant," he shrugged. "Had younger siblings, And we had a milk cow that birthed twins last spring. Same principle, I figured. The casual way he said it made her laugh, her first genuine laugh in months. It felt strange, almost painful, as if her body had forgotten how. Isaiah smiled at the sound, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she remembered. For a moment, it felt like the 3 years since they'd last been together had never happened, but reality intruded quickly. "Do you think they're still looking for us?" she asked. Isaiah's expression grew serious. "Victor Davenport isn't a man who gives up easily. His reach in the territory is long. How long can we stay here? As long as needed. I've got supplies for a few weeks, and game is plentiful in these mountains." Rosalie looked around the small cabin, trying to imagine weeks or months hidden away here. "What about your ranch?" "Your life down there, it can wait," he said simply. She studied his face, seeing the determination there. "I can't ask you to put your life on hold for us, Isaiah. You didn't ask, I offered." He moved to the fireplace, stoking the flames before adding another log. "Besides, that ranch hasn't been much of a life, it's just land and cattle." He glanced over his shoulder at her. "This is family." The word hung between them, full of meaning. Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes. "We aren't your responsibility." "Thomas is my son," Isaiah replied firmly. "That makes him my responsibility, and you—" he hesitated. "You were mine before you were ever Victor's in the ways that matter." "I was forced to marry him," she said softly, "but the vows still stand. In the eyes of the law and the church, I'm his wife." Isaiah turned to face her fully. "And in your heart, in my heart, I've only ever belonged to one man." The confession seemed to shake him. He crossed the small cabin in 2 strides, kneeling before her. With gentle fingers, he touched Thomas's cheek, then raised his hand to Rosalie's face, brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Then we'll find a way," he promised. "Somehow." For the next week, they settled into a cautious routine. Isaiah hunted and checked snare lines in the early mornings, bringing back rabbit and occasionally deer. Rosalie cooked and tended to Thomas, who grew more alert and responsive each day. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking of their lives during their years apart. Isaiah told her of the cattle drives through hostile territory, of the friends he'd made and lost. She spoke of her father's decline into gambling and drinking after her mother's death, of the coldness of life as Victor Davenport's wife. "He never hurt me physically," she admitted one night. "But his words, they cut deeper than any blade could, and the way he looked at me like I was property he'd purchased, which I suppose I was." Isaiah's fists clenched at his sides. "No man has the right to own another. In Tucson, Victor Davenport practically owns the law," she said bitterly. "The sheriff, the judge, they are all in his pocket. Even if we ran, he'd find us eventually." "Not if we go far enough," Isaiah suggested. "California, maybe, or up to Montana territory." Rosalie shook her head. "He'd never stop looking. Not after the humiliation of his wife running off with another man's child." She looked down at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I just want him to be safe, to grow up free." That night, as Isaiah lay on his bedroll by the fire, he heard Rosalie crying softly in the darkness. Without thinking, he rose and went to her, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking her hand in his. "We'll find a way," he whispered again. She turned toward him, her face streaked with tears in the dim firelight. "Hold me," she pleaded. "Just hold me, Isaiah." He hesitated only a moment before stretching out beside her on the narrow bed, careful not to disturb Thomas, who slept in his basket nearby. He wrapped his arms around her, and she buried her face against his chest, her tears soaking through his shirt. They stayed that way until dawn, neither speaking, both acutely aware of the impossibility of their situation and the depth of their feelings for each other. As the days passed, Isaiah began teaching Rosalie to shoot. They practiced with his revolver behind the cabin, using pine cones as targets. "You're a natural," he told her as she hit her mark for the third time in a row. "My father taught me when I was young," she admitted. "Before the drinking took over, Victor forbade me from even touching firearms after we married." Isaiah's expression darkened at the mention of her husband, but he said nothing, simply reloading the revolver for her next round of practice. That afternoon, as Rosalie was washing clothes in the creek, Thomas asleep in a basket beside her, she heard the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. Dropping the wet garment, she snatched up her son and ran for the cabin. Isaiah was already at the door, rifle in hand, his expression tense. "Get inside," he ordered. "Take Thomas to the root cellar." The cabin had a small storage space dug beneath the floorboards, similar to the hiding place at Isaiah's ranch. Rosalie descended into it, clutching Thomas tightly as Isaiah replaced the trapdoor and slid a rug over it. Through the cracks between the boards, she could see Isaiah position himself by the window, rifle raised. Her heart hammered in her chest as the sound of horses grew closer, then stopped. She heard men's voices, then footsteps on the cabin's porch, a knock at the door. "Who's there?" Isaiah called. "U.S. Marshal Service," came the reply. "Looking for Isaiah Barrett." Rosalie saw Isaiah's shoulders relax slightly, though he kept his rifle ready. He moved to the door, opening it partway. "I'm Barrett," he said. "What can I do for you, Marshal?" Through the gap in the floorboards, Rosalie could see the boots of two men standing on the porch. "Name's Marshal James Calloway," the first man said. "This is Deputy Wells. We're investigating the disappearance of Rosalie Davenport and her infant son. Her husband believes they may be with you." "I haven't seen Rosalie in years," Isaiah replied smoothly. "Not since before she married Davenport." "Mind if we look around?" the marshal asked, "just to be thorough." There was a pause before Isaiah stepped back. "Be my guest, not much to see." Rosalie held her breath as the men entered the cabin. Thomas stirred against her chest, and she prayed he wouldn't wake and cry. She could see the boots moving around the small space above her, hear the men opening cupboards, checking the corners. "Looks like you're living alone," the marshal finally said, "though I see you've got supplies for more than one man." "I don't come up here often," Isaiah explained. "Like to make sure I'm stocked when I do." "What brings you up to this isolated spot anyway, Mr. Barrett?" the deputy asked. "Peace and quiet," Isaiah answered. "Been scouting some new grazing land for my cattle. The lowland pastures are getting crowded these days." There was another pause, and Rosalie sensed the marshal was studying Isaiah carefully. "You served with Colonel Harrison in the Apache campaigns, didn't you?" the marshal suddenly asked. "For a time," Isaiah acknowledged. "Why, just placing you. He spoke highly of your tracking skills." The marshal's boots moved toward the door. "If you do happen to see Mrs. Davenport or hear anything about her whereabouts, I'd appreciate you letting me know. We've got a camp down by the crossroads. We'll be in the area for a few days." "I'll keep that in mind," Isaiah said. "One more thing, Barrett," the marshal added. "Victor Davenport is offering a substantial reward for information, $500. "That's a lot of money," Isaiah commented neutrally. "Yes, it is. Good day to you." The door closed and Rosalie heard the men's boots on the porch, then the sounds of horses moving away. Still, she remained frozen in place. Thomas clutched to her chest until the trapdoor opened above her, revealing Isaiah's face. "They're gone," he said, helping her up. "But they'll be back. That marshal didn't believe me." "How could he know to look here?" Rosalie asked, trembling slightly as she sat in one of the chairs. "Davenport must know about my family's old line shack," Isaiah said, pacing the small cabin. It was common knowledge years ago that the Barretts had grazing land up this way. What do we do now? Isaiah looked out the window, his expression grim. We need to move, tonight. There's another place further north, an old mining claim my father worked briefly. Is it safe? Safer than here. It's more remote, harder to find unless you know exactly where to look. He turned to face her. But it's a difficult journey, especially with an infant. Rosalie straightened her shoulders. We'll manage. They spent the remainder of the day preparing, packing only essential supplies. Isaiah insisted Rosalie take his heavier coat. The mountains would be colder where they were headed. As twilight descended, they led the horses quietly away from the cabin, taking a game trail that wound steeply upward through the pines. The journey was treacherous in the darkness. Twice, Rosalie's horse stumbled on the rocky path, nearly unseating her. Thomas, remarkably, stayed quiet, lulled by the steady motion and wrapped warmly against the growing chill. By midnight, they had reached a high ridge overlooking a vast, moonlit valley. In the far distance, Rosalie could make out the faint lights of Tucson. We'll rest here briefly, Isaiah said, helping her dismount. The horses need a breather before the next climb. They sat on a fallen log, Thomas cradled between them, gazing out at the silver-washed landscape. It's beautiful, Rosalie whispered. I'd almost forgotten what freedom feels like. Isaiah's hand found hers in the darkness. I'll never let them take that from you again, he vowed. Either of you. She turned to look at him, his features barely visible in the dim light. Why, Isaiah? Why risk everything for us? Because I never stopped loving you, he said simply. Not for a single day. The words hung between them, honest and raw. Rosalie leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, then grew deeper as years of longing rushed to the surface. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. I'm still married, she whispered, the painful reality intruding. I know. Isaiah's voice was rough with emotion. But in my heart, you've always been mine. They continued their journey shortly after, climbing higher into the mountains. By dawn, they had reached their destination, a small, crude cabin built into the side of a cliff, partially concealed by a stand of gnarled juniper trees. A narrow stream cascaded down the rocky slope nearby. My father built this place when I was just a boy, Isaiah explained as he unlocked the weathered door. The silver vein played out quickly, but he kept the claim, said it might come in handy someday. Inside, the cabin was dusty but sound, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a pair of cots along the wall. A crude cabinet held basic mining tools and a few dented pots. It's not much, Isaiah said apologetically. It's perfect, Rosalie replied, meaning it. No one will find us here. They spent the day making the cabin habitable, sweeping out dust and spiders, arranging their supplies, building a fire to ward off the mountain chill. Isaiah fashioned a cradle for Thomas from a wooden crate and some blankets, placing it between the two cots. That night, as they sat by the fire eating a simple meal of dried venison and beans, Rosalie found herself studying the strong lines of Isaiah's face, wondering what might have been if she'd waited for him, if she'd found the courage to defy her father. "What are you thinking?" Isaiah asked, catching her gaze. "That I wish things had been different," she admitted. "That I'd been stronger." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You are the strongest person I know, Rose. You saved your son, you found me, we're together now. But for how long?" The question had been haunting her. "Victor won't stop looking, and as long as I'm his wife." Isaiah's expression grew thoughtful. "There might be a way," he said slowly. "It won't be easy, but it could work." "What way?" "We need evidence of Victor's crimes," he explained. I've heard rumors for years that he's been rustling cattle, running protection schemes, maybe worse, if we could prove it. He's careful, Rosalie said. He never dirties his own hands. Everyone makes mistakes, and everyone has enemies who know their secrets. Isaiah leaned forward. I know people in Tucson who hate Victor Davenport as much as we do, people who might help us. It's too dangerous, she protested. If he caught you, some risks are worth taking. His eyes held hers steadily. I want us to have a real life, Rose. You, me, and Thomas. A family. The words sent a wave of longing through her so intense it was almost painful. A family, she repeated softly. I need to go back to Tucson, he said, just for a few days, to talk to some people, gather information. Fear clutched at Rosalie's heart. No, it's too risky. They'll be watching for you. I'll be careful, he promised, and you'll be safe here. No one knows about this place except me. They argued late into the night, but by morning, Isaiah's mind was made up. He would leave the following day, riding down to Tucson under cover of darkness. 3 days, he promised as he prepared to depart. 4 at most, if I'm not back by then. Don't, Rosalie said, unable to bear the thought. You'll come back. He kissed her fiercely, then bent to press his lips to Thomas's forehead. Take care of your mama, he whispered to the baby. I'm counting on you, little man. Rosalie stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching until Isaiah disappeared around a bend in the trail. Then she closed the door, secured it with the heavy wooden bar, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. The first day passed slowly. Rosalie kept busy, cleaning the cabin more thoroughly, washing clothes in the stream, singing to Thomas. The second day was harder. She found herself jumping at every sound, rushing to the window at the slightest noise. By the third day, worry had settled in her stomach like a stone. She paced the small cabin, Thomas in her arms, praying silently for Isaiah's safe return. When night fell with no sign of him, she couldn't sleep, sitting instead by the window, watching the moonlit trail. The fourth day dawned bright and clear. Rosalie moved mechanically through her tasks, trying to distract herself from the growing fear that Isaiah wasn't coming back. Had Victor's men found him? Was he lying hurt somewhere, or worse? As the sun began to set on the fourth day, Rosalie had just put Thomas down for the night when she heard the unmistakable sound of approaching hoofbeats. She grabbed the revolver Isaiah had left her, moving to the window and peering out cautiously. A lone rider was approaching, slumped in the saddle. Even in the fading light, she recognized Diablo, Isaiah's horse, and the rider. She threw open the door and ran outside. Isaiah. He raised his head at the sound of her voice, and she saw with horror that his face was battered, one eye swollen shut, dried blood caking his shirt. Rose, he gasped as she reached him, helping him down from the saddle. I'm sorry I'm late. What happened? She demanded, supporting him as they moved toward the cabin. Who did this to you? Victor's men, he managed, grimacing in pain. They were waiting at my ranch when I went back for some things. Inside the cabin, she helped him to one of the cots, then hurried to fetch water and clean cloths. As she gently cleaned his wounds, he told her what had happened. I made it to Tucson without trouble, he began. Met with some people I trust, a former marshal named Jenkins who's been building a case against Victor for years, a few ranchers who have lost cattle under suspicious circumstances. I got what we needed: evidence of Victor's dealings with cattle rustlers, testimony about bribery of officials. He winced as Rosalie dabbed at a particularly deep cut over his eye. I was careful, he continued. Kept to back roads, only moved at night. But when I stopped at my ranch to collect some money I had hidden there, they were waiting. How many? She asked, her voice tight. 4 men. I didn't recognize them. They worked me over pretty good, wanted to know where you were. His hand caught hers. I didn't tell them, Rose, I swear it. How did you escape? A grim smile crossed his battered face. "They got careless, left only one man guarding me while the others searched the house. I managed to get the drop on him, took his gun." Rosalie's hands trembled as she finished cleaning his wounds. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" He nodded reluctantly. "Ribs. Think a couple might be cracked." She helped him remove his shirt, gasping at the dark bruises that covered his torso. Using strips torn from one of her petticoats, she bound his ribs tightly, trying to be gentle despite his occasional grunts of pain. "Did you find what you were looking for in Tucson?" she asked when she'd finished, sitting beside him on the cot. Isaiah reached into his boot, pulling out a folded packet of papers. Statements signed by witnesses. Records of transactions, enough to put Victor away for a long time. He took her hand. "And I spoke to a judge, William Hawkins. He's new to the territory, not in Victor's pocket. He's willing to hear our case." Hope bloomed in Rosalie's chest, quickly tempered by caution. "When?" "As soon as we can get to Prescott." "That's where his circuit takes him next, in 2 weeks." Isaiah's eyes were serious despite his injuries. "It's a risk, Rose. We'd have to leave our hiding place, travel through open country." She looked over at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in his makeshift cradle. "For his sake, it's a risk we have to take." Isaiah nodded, then grimaced as the movement caused him pain. "We'll leave in 3 days. I need to heal up a bit first." Those 3 days passed in anxious preparation. Isaiah regained his strength quickly, though his movements were still stiff and careful. They packed supplies, plotted their route, and discussed contingency plans in case they encountered trouble on the road. "If anything happens to me," Isaiah said on the eve of their departure, "take the papers to Judge Hawkins. His office is on Montezuma Street in Prescott." "Nothing will happen to you," Rosalie insisted. "We're going to make it together." They left at dawn, Rosalie riding Juniper with Thomas secured to her chest in a sling Isaiah had fashioned from a blanket. Isaiah rode Diablo, his rifle across his lap, constantly scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. The journey to Prescott would take 5 days at a steady pace. They kept to less traveled paths where possible, camping in concealed locations each night. By the 3rd day, they had descended from the mountains and were crossing a vast, open valley. "We're exposed here," Isaiah said as they rode side by side across the scrubland. "We'll need to push through without stopping until we reach the foothills on the other side." They rode hard all day, the sun beating down mercilessly. Thomas grew fussy in the heat, and twice they had to stop briefly to allow Rosalie to nurse him. By late afternoon, the foothills were in sight, perhaps 2 hours' ride away. That was when Isaiah spotted the dust cloud behind them. "Riders," he said grimly, "moving fast, at least 4. Rosalie felt fear grip her heart. "Victor's men, most likely." Isaiah's expression was grim. "They're gaining on us. We won't make the foothills before they catch up." "What do we do?" He pointed to a rock formation about a mile ahead. "There, we can make a stand. It's defensible." They urged their horses forward, reaching the rocks with barely 15 minutes to spare. Isaiah helped Rosalie and Thomas into a natural alcove formed by 2 massive boulders, then positioned himself with his rifle at a vantage point overlooking the approach. "Stay down," he told her. "Whatever happens, don't show yourself until I call for you." Rosalie held Thomas close, trying to keep him quiet as the sound of approaching horses grew louder. From her hiding place, she could see Isaiah, his face set in determined lines as he readied his rifle. The riders came into view, 5 men, Victor's foreman Jackson in the lead. They slowed as they approached the rocks, clearly aware that their quarry had gone to ground. "Barrett," Jackson called out, "we know you're up there. Send out the woman and the baby and maybe we'll let you live. You want them, you'll have to come through me," Isaiah shouted back. The men spread out, dismounting and drawing their weapons. One made a dash toward a boulder to the right, but Isaiah's rifle cracked and the man fell with a cry, clutching his leg. "That's your only warning shot," Isaiah called. "Next one kills." A tense standoff ensued. Rosalie could hear the men conferring in low voices, trying to determine how to approach the rocks without exposing themselves to Isaiah's fire. Then a new voice called out, one that made her blood run cold. "Rosalie, I know you can hear me. Victor Davenport. Come out now with my son and I'll be merciful," he continued. "Stay with that murderer and you'll both die up there." Isaiah glanced back at Rosalie, his expression questioning. She shook her head vehemently. "She doesn't want anything to do with you, Davenport," Isaiah called. "Neither does my son." A shot rang out, chipping stone inches from Isaiah's position. He ducked, returning fire, and one of Victor's men yelped in pain. "You're outnumbered, Barrett," Victor shouted. "Be sensible. The boy is mine by law, whatever his blood." "Give him to me, and you and the woman can go." "He's lying," Rosalie whispered, though only Thomas could hear her. "He'd kill us both." The standoff continued as the sun began to set. Occasionally, one of Victor's men would try to advance, only to be driven back by Isaiah's accurate fire. But Rosalie knew they were in trouble. Isaiah had limited ammunition, and soon darkness would fall, allowing the men to approach from multiple directions. Then she heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats, many horses riding hard. For a moment, she feared Victor had summoned reinforcements. But the reaction of the men below told a different story. "Riders coming," one of them shouted. "At least a dozen. It's a patrol," another called. "Army or marshals," Victor's voice cut through the confusion. "Fall back into the rocks on the south side." From her position, Rosalie could see a group of horsemen approaching at a gallop, dust billowing behind them. They wore the distinctive hats of the U.S. Marshal Service. Isaiah remained in position, rifle ready, until the newcomers had surrounded Victor and his men. Only when he saw Marshal Calloway himself directing the arrest of Victor Davenport did he lower his weapon. "Rose," he called softly, "I think it's over." She emerged cautiously from her hiding place, Thomas clutched to her chest. Below, she could see Victor being handcuffed, his expression a mask of fury as he caught sight of her. "That's my son," he shouted, struggling against the deputies holding him. "She stole my son." Marshal Calloway looked up at Rosalie, then at Isaiah, who had moved to stand protectively beside her. "Is that true, madam?" he called. Rosalie straightened her shoulders. "No, Marshal. This is Isaiah Barrett's son. I can prove it." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "We'll sort this all out back in Prescott. Judge Hawkins is waiting for you." As the marshals led Victor and his men away, Isaiah turned to Rosalie, pulling her and Thomas into a careful embrace despite his still healing ribs. "How did they find us?" she wondered. "I sent a telegram from my ranch before Victor's men caught me," Isaiah explained. "To Judge Hawkins, telling him we were coming and might need protection." He smiled down at her. "I didn't entirely trust Victor to play by the rules." The journey to Prescott passed without further incident, the marshal's patrol escorting them the entire way. Judge William Hawkins proved to be a stern but fair man who listened carefully to their story and reviewed the evidence Isaiah had gathered against Victor. The hearing lasted 3 days. Victor, representing himself with the arrogance of a man accustomed to bending the law to his will, argued that regardless of the child's paternity, he was legally Thomas's father by virtue of his marriage to Rosalie. "The law recognizes that children born within a marriage belong to the husband," he insisted. "Whatever Mrs. Davenport's indiscretions may have been before our wedding, but the evidence against Victor was damning. 3 witnesses testified to his involvement in cattle rustling operations. A former deputy admitted to taking bribes to look the other way. Most damning of all, one of Victor's own men, seeking leniency, confessed that Victor had ordered him to get rid of the baby once Rosalie was recaptured. On the final day of the hearing, Judge Hawkins rendered his verdict. Victor Davenport would stand trial for multiple felonies, including conspiracy, bribery, and attempted murder. Until that trial, he would remain in custody, considered too dangerous to release on bail. As for Thomas, the judge's ruling was equally clear. While the law typically presumes a husband to be the father of his wife's child, this presumption can be overcome by clear evidence to the contrary. Mr. Barrett has provided such evidence, including testimony establishing that the child was conceived prior to Mrs. Davenport's marriage. Furthermore, Mr. Davenport's documented intention to harm the child negates any claim he might otherwise have. The judge turned to Rosalie. As for your marriage, Mrs. Davenport, I am granting an annulment on grounds of duress and coercion. The testimony shows clearly that you were forced into this union against your will to satisfy your father's debts. Such a marriage is not valid in the eyes of the law. Tears of relief streamed down Rosalie's face as she clutched Thomas to her chest. Beside her, Isaiah sat straight-backed and solemn until the judge concluded the proceedings, then turned to her with eyes shining. "You're free," he whispered. "Both of you." Outside the courthouse, in the bright Prescott sunshine, Rosalie could scarcely believe it was over. Victor was in custody, her marriage dissolved, her son legally recognized as Isaiah's. For the first time in years, she could breathe without fear. What happens now? She asked as they walked toward the small hotel where they'd been staying during the hearing. Isaiah stopped, turning to face her. With gentle hands, he took Thomas from her arms, smiling down at the baby who gurgled happily in response. "That depends on you," he said. "My ranch is still there, waiting. It's not much yet, but it could be a good home, for all of us." "Are you asking me to marry you, Isaiah Barrett?" Rosalie's heart pounded in her chest. He smiled, the same boyish smile she'd fallen in love with years ago. "I am. Though I don't have a ring yet, and we'd have to wait for the banns to be read properly this time." "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in Prescott's small church, with Marshal Calloway and his wife as witnesses. Thomas, dressed in a christening gown sewn by Mrs. Calloway, slept peacefully through the entire ceremony. Their journey back to the ranch near Tucson was filled with plans for the future. Isaiah spoke of expanding the herd, building a proper house to replace the small cabin. Rosalie dreamed of a garden, maybe chickens, and definitely more children. "Brothers and sisters for Thomas," she said, leaning against Isaiah's shoulder as they sat on the porch of the cabin their first night home. "As many as you want," he agreed, his arm around her waist. "2 more, I think, a girl and another boy." She smiled up at him. "I never thought I'd have this, a family of my own chosen freely." "When you showed up at my door that night," Isaiah said thoughtfully, "begging me to take Thomas and run, did you know I'd insist on taking you too?" Rosalie considered the question. "I hoped," she admitted. "But I was prepared for you to refuse, to hate me for marrying Victor, for keeping your son from you. I could never hate you." He turned to face her fully. "When you asked me to take the baby and run, all I could think was that I'd already lost you once. I wasn't going to lose you again." "Not without me too," she quoted softly. "Not without you too," he confirmed, pulling her close. "Ever." Inside the cabin, Thomas began to cry, his timing impeccable as always. Rosalie moved to rise, but Isaiah gently held her back. "I'll go," he said. "You rest." She watched as he went inside, listened to his deep voice soothing their son, and felt a contentment she'd thought forever beyond her reach. The path that had brought them here had been dangerous and difficult, but as Isaiah emerged with Thomas in his arms, settling beside her to watch the sunset, she knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. 5 years later, the Barrett ranch had transformed. The small cabin had given way to a proper 2-story house, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. The herd had tripled in size, making Isaiah one of the more successful ranchers in the area. And the family had grown to Thomas, now 6, had been joined by 3-year-old Rebecca and 1-year-old James. On a warm spring evening, as the children played in the yard under the watchful eye of Maria, their housekeeper, Isaiah and Rosalie sat on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder. "Any word from the marshal about Victor?" she asked. It was a question she posed every few months, needing the reassurance. "Still serving his sentence in Yuma," Isaiah confirmed. 10 more years at least." She nodded, the familiar relief washing over her. Victor Davenport had been sentenced to 20 years for his crimes. By the time he was released, Thomas would be a grown man. "I saw Jenkins in town yesterday," Isaiah continued, referring to the former marshal who had helped them build their case years ago. "He mentioned that Victor's old ranch is up for sale. His creditors finally foreclosed." "Good," Rosalie said firmly. "That land has known too much suffering." Isaiah's arm tightened around her shoulders. "We've come a long way from that night you showed up at my door." "The best decision I ever made," she said softly, "coming to me, trusting you with our son, with our future." She turned to look at him, this man who had risked everything for her and Thomas. "I asked you to take my baby and run, and I refused to go without you," he finished. "Best refusal I ever made." In the yard, Thomas called out excitedly, having spotted a jackrabbit near the barn. Rebecca and even little James toddled after him, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. Isaiah and Rosalie watched their children, the living embodiment of the love and courage that had brought them together against all odds. In a territory still wild and often dangerous, they had carved out a haven of peace and happiness not by running away, but by standing together. "I love you, Mrs. Barrett," Isaiah said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I love you," Rosalie replied, knowing that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them the same way they had faced Victor Davenport and all the obstacles that had tried to keep them apart together, as a family. Not one of them left behind.